The Harris Improv just celebrated its 15th year.
Yeah.
And I heard a great story about, there it is right there, you are on stage.
At that Harris Improv, right?
Yeah. Now, the first night, there was a story about the first night with Wendy.
The first
Wendy
night we were
Liebman?
opening, and Wendy Liebman, I think it was a middle act, that's how long ago it was.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure. And there was a fire in the hotel, and they canceled the show. And we were going to do 2 shows that night, and I figured we're done. So I took my wife Alex and Wendy and a few other guys, and we went across the street to Spargo at Caesars, yeah. And
So there was going to be no show.
yeah, we
obviously.
figured no first show.
Fire,
anyway,
no first show.
Second show.
There's Wendy right
Wendy,
there.
lovely Wendy. And we're sitting there eating, we're drinking champagne, and another comic comes in who didn't work for me. What was his name? Anyway, and he says, well, I'll see you at the second show. I said, I'll see you at the show. I said, there's no show. He said, yes, there is. I just came from the hotel. It was just a grease fire in the elevator, and they, contained it, and there's no problem. There'll be a second show. I said, get the champagne out of here. We got to go to work.
What is one of the stars that you've enjoyed meeting most?
Well, that's
a hard one because there's so many.
No, it's not.
No?
Because, the one night at the club in New York, out here, we had been open a couple of years, and one of my waitresses came up and she says, aren't you crazy about Barbra Streisand? I said, yeah, she's my favorite performer. Why? Well, she's just leaving. I said, what? Yeah, she's been inside. She's in the lobby talking to Jimmy Walker. So I go running out, and Jimmy says goodbye, and I go over and I introduce myself to her, and I said, Budd Friedman, I own the Improv, and big fan of crap. She says, the Improv, she says, why does that name sound familiar? I said, well, we've been open in New York for over 10 years now. We've opened here just last year. And a lot of people, have started with me, like Jimmy Walker, who we were talking to, Freddie Prinze, Barbra Streisand. And I meant to say, and she goes, oh, using my name in vain, are we? And she was delightful. I said, well, now I said, no, I'm saying Bette Midler, I'm sorry, I meant to say Bette Midler. And she was very gracious. She was just terrific. When I first moved out here in 1974, to open in 75, I called up Jay Leno, whom I used to manage back in New York, and I said, Jay, I'm a club owner without any money. I need a car out here. I didn't need one in New York. Help me get something.
Really?
Jay is a car maven.
Right.
So Jay says, let me look, and a week later he says, I got the car for you out in Pasadena. It's a 69 4-door Cadillac with the big fins. 12,000 miles. Well, that was great. So, sorry, did I say 69? 59. 1959. And so we go out to look at the car, and it's beautiful. It's in great shape. And the young man who was selling it, his father owned Whammo, the hula hoop thing.
Oh, wow.
And the kid says, see our house back there? 100 years old. And Jay just bites his tongue, and we drive away. And Jay says, my parents, who are say lower middle class economically, live in a home that's 300 years old, big deal. Anyway, the car was great, and I was parked on Melrose Avenue in front of the club one night, and a car came by and swiped it.
Really?
And I was heartbroken, and I called the police, and the policeman comes to make a report, and at the time, Andy Kaufman was doing he did 3 of them. They were called Midnight Snacks. And he did a takeoff on a talk show, and he had a riser on the stage, and his chair was on the riser, and everyone else's chairs were on the stage, and they had to look up to Jay like this. To Andy doing, what would become of Jay. Anyway, and it was hilarious. And he had a has-been corner. And for the first 2 weeks, he had on ex-waitresses of ours, whom he used to wrestle with, and they would come up with these fantastic stories. One was Miss America, and instead of going to college, she chose the money, and then she got married, and the guy took all her money, and then she starts weeping. She has 2 children. That's your husband. The last guy to come up, the third week, was a friend of his who was taping the shows for him, you know, very casually. And he's now the has-been, and he was a real has-been. And his name is Richard Bamer, who is the lead in West Side Story, the movie.
Oh,
right?
wow.
And Andy says, "How's it feel?" He holds up an album cover, right, of West Side Story. How's it feel to be a has-been? And Richard says, "I'm not a has-been." He says, "You haven't done anything since West Side Story 15 years ago." And Richard says, "Andy, when you do a movie as important as West Side Story, you have to pick and choose your next episode, next movie very carefully." So Andy says, "Well, would you sing for us?" He said, "Sure." He says, "You know, that's why they ruined the movie." He says, "Because they dubbed my voice," Richard Bamer says.
Right.
And he starts singing, and he purposely cracks his voice singing Maria. And he walks off crying, saying, "Maybe I am a has-been."
Oh.
And I'm up in my office. We'd have a little window overlooking the stage, and the
Right.
cop and I, we're wetting our pants. We're hysterical. My poor car is destroyed. He's supposed to take a report. And we're watching Richard Bamer there. He is.
Now, when he came in, though, to the club to interview you, I heard he interviewed as Latka. And you thought that's who he was.
Oh, you mean when I first met him?
When you first met him.
Yes, yes. He was recommended to me back in New York City by a guy who owned a club in coffee house in Great Neck where Andy lived. And he said, "You got to see this guy." And I don't ask questions. I said, "Fine, if you recommend him. Send him in, tell him to come in 11 o'clock, which is a quiet time for us." He shows up, he says, "How do you do?" He says, "My name is Andy Kaufman." And "Where you from, kid?" "I am from a small island in the Caspian Sea." Well, I didn't know there were no islands in the Caspian Sea. I said, "Okay." And so he gets up and he's doing his act as the foreign man. And people are laughing sort of nervously, as I am.
Right.
Little twitters,
Not sure.
those kind of. And then he does his Elvis impression, and it's spot on. And I say, "Well, I was in Japan. I heard Japanese women singing American songs. They were right on. Yeah, but they couldn't speak English. They could just sing it. So that's something what Andy is doing.
Right.
This person. And then when he finishes, "Well, thank you very much," I knew I had been had, and I became a lifelong devotee of Andy.
And you were obviously in the movie Man on the Moon.
Yes,
in a similar scene, watching in the club.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim Carrey
was
just
phenomenal.
Just embodied him.
Yeah, he. One day I came onto the set and I said to the makeup girl, "Have you seen Jim yet?" And she says, "No, I've seen Andy." I mean, he went into character just like Andy did.
Yeah, I heard that on set he really most of the time stayed in Andy because it really helped him become the character.
Yeah.
Was it hard doing the movie? I mean, for you, you know,
me?
obviously we're close with
Well,
Andy,
there were
to
a few,
relive
there
it
were
all.
a few touching moments.
Yeah.
Actually, now that I think of it,
Yeah.
But we did when we did Man on the Moon.
Oh, I got a great picture right here. Can we get a little zoom on that?
Zoom
please?
on this, as they say in the biz. This is Danny DeVito. This is Danny. I can't. Well, Danny, you know Danny DeVito.
I'll point.
This is Danny DeVito, who played George Shapiro, Andy's manager.
Right.
Also managed another kid named Seinfeld. Oh, Jerry Seinfeld. Yeah.
Who?
Right. Yeah.
Who?
And that's me, of course, and that's Jim Carrey, and Paul Giamatti over here, who has gone on to great stuff. He played Bob Zamuda, Andy's friend and foil.
Now, you mentioned, obviously, I started at the Improv. Now, I started the Improv running the room and you've had a lot of famous people that people don't realize were working your door. You know, I mean, in New York, definitely, and even in LA, you had, was Keenan worked your door?
Keenan Wayans, Joe Piscopo. Of course, Danny Aiello, who's one of my favorite doormen, the biggest guy in the world, but a real sweetheart.
I'll never forget about Aiello. You did this amazing tribute at the Improv to Dangerfield. And I Aiello was sitting in the hallway, and he was going to go on stage, and he was so nervous. And I was like, oh, you're Danny Aiello. You know, like, why are you nervous? And he's like, oh, I don't. You guys do this live thing with the funny. He's like, I do 6, 7 takes. You know?
Oh, he used to, you know. Danny started at the club. I hired him as a bouncer. He was out of work. Oh, there's Joe Piscopo, handsome Joe. But Danny was, I hired him because I found him in the park, Central Park, playing softball, and we had a team in the Broadway Show League. So he's a wonderful athlete. So I hired him as a doorman. And, you know, I paid him $190 a week, which was a fortune. Really, because more money than I was making at the time. And he never forgot that. And whenever he does an interview, he mentions, you know, his start at the Improv.
What other
women.
Beautiful women have
What
you
do you mean,
met?
what other beautiful? Well, I met the most beautiful woman in the world at the Improv,
Here it comes.
who became my wife.
There you go.
And is my
Somebody's
wife.
getting lucky today.
Yeah, and
Hi,
my wife
Alex.
Alexandria and I
Hi,
just
Alex.
celebrate. We've been celebrating our 30th anniversary in May. So,
Oh, that's nice.
you know, that's almost a felony here in Hollywood. That's Joanne Astro's line, by the way.
Is it?
I got to give her credit in case they see this. But yes, I met my wife. She was introduced to me by a mutual friend, and can't be lucky. But
Was it
the
fix-up?
other beautiful woman, huh?
It was a fix-up?
No, just a casual introduction.
Casual
yeah.
advice? Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't casual for me. It was for Alex. But I did have the great pleasure of meeting Raquel Welsh
There you go.
a few times at the Improv. She was there for, we were doing our, I think our 15th anniversary in, can we go back to that picture for a moment?
Yeah.
15th anniversary in LA. We had a party, and I had this great press agent in New York whom I lost in my divorce because his hand was LA too. My ex-wife
You lost
got
your
him.
press
Yeah.
agent?
Yeah, and so I had to call him up. I needed a press agent, and he got me a man named Stanley Cowan, who was Warren Cowan's brother. But he was a black sheep of the family, and he was a little old-fashioned. And for celebrities, he brought in Georgie Jessel and what's his name? Rudy Valley. Well, I could have gotten Rudy Valley, never. So it wasn't a very, you know, but Raquel also. And so Alex and I were just living together at the time. And she wasn't at the club yet. She was coming in later, and I called because Georgie Jessel showed up with all these medals. I said, honey, get my medal. She brings it down, and that medal you saw on my lapel was from the Bronx. When I lived in the Bronx, Lowe's 167th Street had a Tarzan movie playing. I won this swimming medal when I was 16.
Oh.
It was called Tarzan Swim
Oh,
Me.
that's so awesome.
So I had to show up something to Georgie Jessel.
Showed up with your swimming medal.
Yes.
That's awesome. And proudly, I'm sure you
Oh
did.
yeah,
Of course you
absolutely,
did. Of course you did.
yeah.
Every comics, you know, they all have their stories of how they started, and for me, we all wanted to sit at your table at the Improv, and the day you sat at Budd, the day Budd invited you with champagne over to his table, you knew you had arrived. And to me and everyone, you've always been so gracious, and I think that's why the Improv is what it is, why it is such a home and love, and the way people talk about it, because everybody, just always feels great there, and I can't thank you enough. Now, speaking of a lot of comics, we see them. You had A&E's evening at the Improv, and now there's things like Comic Relief, and all over the place, all these comics. I wanted to talk about Oprah for a second because.
Talk about comedy.
Talk
about funny women.
Yeah, talk about there she is right there. No, but she's leaving this year, and she did a very nice thing at the Improv about Comic Relief.
She did. I think it was the first year of this Comic Relief. She did the whole segment.
And this was
from
then,
the
yes?
Improv with Robin Williams and who's not Billy Crystal and. Who else? Whoopi Goldberg, who are not shown in that picture, but they were all there, and they did the full Oprah show, all about Comic Relief and these people from the Improv. And we've also done a lot of segments for the Jerry Lewis Telethon, where they would come in and tape 10 comics, and then there's Whoopi, and they would tape 10 comics. And then feed them into the show.
Right.
Funny story about Whoopi. My wife Alexandria, one of the wonderful attributes about her was, besides her beauty, intelligent wit,
he's good.
She's not in the business, you know.
Yeah.
I love that. So the first night I was smitten with it, completely smitten. So we're at the Improv. So first date, next night we go to the Improv. Price was right for me, and I always got a good table. And we go in, and we're sitting watching the show, and this comic goes on, and she says, "I think I can do that." When he finished, I said, "What?" "Well, he seems to be having so much fun. I think I could do that." I said, "Oh boy!" I said, "You know." We go back the next night. Fate would have it, the same comic is on again. When he finishes, he says, "No, I don't think I can do that." It was Robin Williams. She saw Robin carrying on and she said, "Oh, look how much fun he's having. I can do that." Oh.
I did the same thing. I was watching Seinfeld one night, and he was doing, like on a Tuesday night, he was, bombing. And George Wallace was sitting there, and I was like, "See, I could do that." And George Wallace goes, "No, see, that's what makes him amazing. Even though he's on NBC, and that he's still willing to come work on his material, and that's what just makes him fabulous."
Yeah, there's
Seinfeld right there.
There's people are always, once they become a comic, their whole personality changes. And there was a kid that used to come in the club in New York. He was a cab driver, nice-looking boy, and he'd come in with his dates. I was very happy to see him. He was always very pleasant, very nice. And then one day he says, "I think I'm going to become a comic." And I said, "Oh, really? Let's stay friends, And he was the first one that I remember doing this transition. And he starts to go up, and he's terrible. And then he says to me, "I'm funnier than Freddie Prinze. I'm funnier than Jimmy Walker," who are relatively unknown working at the time. And then he says, makes the cardinal mistake. He says, "I'm funnier than Robert Klein." And I grab him and I throw him through the door, because Robert Klein was the king then.
Wow.
He was the absolute king of the Improv. And, that was just sheer insanity. So I didn't want to take any chances. I had to get this guy out of there. But people do change when they become comedians. Not you, Brad. You're always obnoxious.
Gonna walk away from that one because I still want to work at your club.